I didn't ask for much. Just a chair beside the family. Just a place where I could be seen. But at my son's wedding, they sat me by the kitchen door, where the air smelled of grease and dishes clattered behind a swinging wall. No name in the program. No word of thanks. I watched the bride, her polished parents, the glitter and the spectacle, and reached for the flash drive. On it, a video I had guarded for nearly 30 years. He had once begged me, "Mom, don't ever lose this." And I didn't. I simply played it, precisely when the toasts fell silent. If this story resonated with your soul, click subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from. My name is Linda Morgan. I was 64 years old when my only son, Alex, announced that he was getting married. After working nearly 4 decades as a high school librarian in upstate New York, I had retired just the year before. My days had grown quieter, filled with crossword puzzles, gardening, and volunteering twice a week at the local reading center. The call about his engagement came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was sipping chamomile tea and reorganizing my bookshelf alphabetically, again. Alex's voice had that old excitement in it, the kind I hadn't heard since he got his first job out of college. He told me about Sarah, how wonderful she was, how her parents were very involved, and how they had already started planning a wedding. I smiled. I congratulated him. I said all the right things, and I meant them. I did. I didn't know Sarah very well. We'd only met a handful of times over quick lunches and rushed holidays. She was polished and polite, always wearing sleek ponytails and neutral-colored sweaters. Her family was well-to-do, from Fairfield County, Connecticut. Old money, new manners, the kind of people who printed their names on cocktail napkins and had signature scents in their powder rooms. Still, I was hopeful. I thought maybe this would bring us closer. Wedding planning had a way of doing that, right? I imagined flipping through fabric swatches together, helping choose floral arrangements, even baking a small batch of lemon cookies for a bridal shower. I wasn't expecting to take over. I just wanted to be included. So I waited, and I waited. Weeks passed. I received a group email with the venue information, an elegant estate in Litchfield Hills. There was a link to a wedding website that Sarah had meticulously curated, photos of them smiling on a mountaintop, color palettes in blush and cream, registry links, a countdown clock. My name appeared once at the bottom of the family section under the vague label Mother of the Groom, Linda Morgan. No call, no request, no mention of where I might fit in. I reached out once, gently. I texted Alex and said I'd love to help with anything they needed. He replied 2 hours later with, "Thanks, Mom. We've got it under control." That was it. 7 words. I told myself not to take it personally. It was their day, their vision. My job was to support, not steer. But something about the tone, about the distance in his message, made me feel like a guest in a life I had once been the center of. Still, I prepared. I bought a dress, navy blue with lace sleeves and a modest neckline. Not flashy, but elegant. I had it tailored to fit perfectly. I ordered a pair of low heels and practiced walking in them around the house. I went to the salon for a soft haircut and treated myself to a facial. I even picked out a silver clutch with just enough sparkle to catch the light, but not enough to draw attention. I also began gathering old memories, photos from his childhood, videos I had digitized years ago, little drawings he made in second grade where he'd scribbled, "My mom is my hero," in crooked letters. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet. I just wanted to bring something real, something that reminded him of who he was, who we were. I told a few friends about the wedding. they asked if I'd be giving a speech or if I was helping plan the rehearsal dinner. I laughed it off. I said Sarah's family was handling most of it. I didn't say how little I'd been asked. I didn't say how invisible I was starting to feel. As the date drew closer, the silence grew louder. No updates, no schedule. No invitation to help with anything personal. I received my official invitation in the mail. Thick ivory cardstock with gold embossing. It said, Linda Morgan is cordially invited. No mother of the groom. No special envelope. Just my name, like any other guest. That night, I sat in bed holding the envelope in my lap, reading it over and over. I didn't cry. I just stared at it, trying to understand when the shift had happened. When I'd gone from his whole world to a line on a seating chart, I made a list of everything I would bring: my dress, my shoes, the silver clutch, a backup pair of flats, a travel steamer, tissues, breath mints, and that flash drive with the videos. Just in case. I didn't expect anyone to ask for it, but I knew it needed to be with me. Because even if I wasn't asked to speak, even if I wasn't seated near the front, even if no one remembered the woman who once stayed up all night sewing his Halloween costume or held his hand when he had the flu, I remembered, and I intended to show up, fully, quietly, prepared. The week before the wedding, I began to notice a strange quiet in my son's voice. Not the kind that comes from nerves or exhaustion, but the kind that felt rehearsed, measured. Like he was choosing every word carefully, not to spare my feelings, but to keep me at a distance. He called me once, briefly, to remind me of the time the shuttle would pick up hotel guests for the ceremony. His tone was courteous, efficient, businesslike. It was the kind of call you'd make to a vendor, not your mother. I told myself it was just stress, that he had too much on his plate, that I was reading into things. But then I saw the wedding program. It was sent as a digital PDF to all confirmed guests, a preview of the day of details. I clicked the link from the email late one evening, sitting in my living room with the lamp casting a warm halo over my reading chair. The cover was tasteful, an illustration of the venue in soft watercolors, their names in cursive, Sarah and Alex. I flipped through it slowly, page by page, curious, and with every page, something in me grew colder. The section titled Our Families had photos. Sarah's parents were listed with glowing descriptions: hosts of the evening, pillars of love and generosity. Her sister was named Maid of Honor, Best Friend, and Childhood Partner in Crime. Even Sarah's godmother had a paragraph about her: guidance and wisdom. On Alex's side, there was a picture of his father, who had passed away a decade ago, and a few words about his memory. Then came a photo of Alex with his stepfather, Greg, under which it read, a true role model and support in every chapter of my life. Next to that, a picture of his stepmother, with a caption thanking her for bringing warmth and wisdom into our home. There was no mention of me, no name, no photo, not even a line. I went back to the beginning, scanned every page again. I wondered if perhaps they had included me somewhere else, maybe under special thanks or even acknowledgments. But I wasn't there, not once. I was erased, as if I had never existed in the story of his life. I sat frozen for several minutes, blinking at the screen, my tea long since gone cold beside me. The room felt different, suddenly unfamiliar. My own furniture, my own walls, but nothing felt stable. I thought of all the nights I spent rocking him through fevers, all the lunches I packed, the school projects I stayed up helping him finish, the tears I wiped when he came home heartbroken. I thought of birthdays planned on a single income, of holidays where I stretched every dollar to make magic. I thought of the stories I used to read him at bedtime. The ones about knights and heroes, and how he used to whisper, "You're my hero, Mom," just before drifting off to sleep. And now, somehow, I had been written out. It wasn't just painful. It was surreal, as though someone had taken the book of his life, torn out the first 20 chapters, and started writing from the middle, with different characters, with a different mother. I didn't confront him, not then. I didn't call and ask why. I didn't want a placating answer, something about how Sarah's family handled the program, or how it was just a formality. I knew what it meant. It meant that somewhere along the way, I had been softened in his memory, made smaller, quieter, more convenient to leave behind. I printed the program out anyway. I folded it once, neatly, and placed it in a drawer in my bedroom, not out of sentiment, but as evidence, not for him, for me, to remind myself that this wasn't imagined, that I hadn't simply misunderstood, that I had watched my own name disappear in real time. I spent the next few days in a kind of daze. I ran errands, picked up dry cleaning, checked my packing list for the trip to the wedding, but everything felt slightly unanchored, like I was watching myself from outside my body, smiling at neighbors, thanking the woman at the checkout line, but numb underneath it all. I took the flash drive I had prepared and moved it to a different pocket in my suitcase, not the outer one, the inner zippered pouch, where it wouldn't be jostled or forgotten. I wasn't sure why I did it, but something told me that even if the world they'd built didn't have a place for me in the spotlight, the story I carried still mattered, and I had not forgotten how to tell it. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and cloudless, the kind of perfect September day people plan for but rarely get. The air was crisp, the sunlight sharp, like the world had been freshly wiped clean overnight. I arrived at the estate early, taking the shuttle from the hotel with a small group of other guests. Most of them were strangers, friends of Sarah's family, work acquaintances, distant cousins. They made small talk about the venue, about the dress code, about the signature cocktail. I stayed quiet. The estate was breathtaking, like something out of a bridal magazine. Wrought iron gates opened into manicured gardens. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn facing a floral arch. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and citrus. Staff moved with swift precision, adjusting ribbons, arranging canapes, checking microphones. It was a production. I felt like I had stepped onto a movie set, only I didn't know my lines, or if I was even in the script at all. After the ceremony, which was as beautiful as it was impersonal, we were guided toward the reception area inside a vast historic barn that had been renovated to resemble a rustic chic ballroom, the kind of place where even the exposed beams had been thoughtfully curated. I stood near the entrance for a few moments, letting the tide of guests move around me. I clutched my small silver clutch, the one that matched my dress, and waited for someone to tell me where to go. No one did. Eventually, a young woman in a black blazer and headset approached, holding a clipboard. She smiled brightly and asked for my name. I told her, Linda Morgan. She scanned her list, nodded quickly, and motioned for me to follow her. I trailed behind as she weaved through tables decorated with gold-rimmed glasses and cascading centerpieces. Names written in elegant cursive marked each place setting: Mr. and Mrs. Bradford, Dr. Eliza Klein, Aunt Naomi. I didn't recognize any of them. We passed the head table at the center of the room. It was long and elevated, draped in white velvet and lined with flickering candles. Alex sat at the far end beside Sarah, laughing at something her father had just said. He didn't see me. Finally, the woman stopped. Table 14. It was near the double doors that led into the kitchen, just far enough from the dance floor to be forgotten, just close enough to hear the metallic crash of trays and the hiss of steam from the dishwashers behind the wall. My seat was tucked in the corner, partially obscured by a large potted fern. I stood there for a moment trying to process it. There were no other family members at my table, just distant guests, a couple from out of state, a man who worked with Sarah's father, and a woman whose name I never caught. They smiled politely. I smiled back. And then I sat down. The chair was wobbly. From where I sat, I couldn't see the head table without craning my neck. I could barely hear the toasts that began echoing across the room. Every few minutes, a waiter would push through the kitchen doors beside me, carrying trays above his head, the door slamming back into place each time with a soft thud. The cold from the kitchen seeped into the corner, subtle but persistent. I crossed my arms over my chest and unfolded the napkin onto my lap, more for something to do than out of need. I looked around the room, mothers with corsages on their wrists, fathers clinking glasses, friends taking photos, holding hands, embracing. I saw Sarah's mother floating from table to table, basking in compliments, accepting praise for how perfect everything was. She paused at the head table, leaned down to kiss her daughter, and then whispered something to Alex. He laughed and nodded. He didn't look in my direction. I don't know what I had expected. I suppose part of me thought that someone would notice, that someone would realize there had been a mistake, that Alex, seeing where I had been placed, would walk over, take my hand, and move me closer, that he would say, "This isn't right." But no one came. I folded my hands in my lap and kept my face composed. I nodded when someone asked if I needed water. I smiled faintly when the man beside me made a joke about the length of the speeches. I cut my chicken carefully and ate small bites, tasting none of it. I could hear the music, but not the lyrics. I could see the sparkle of lights, but not the expressions on the faces of the people I once called my own. The farther I sat from the center of the room, the more I realized that I was not just physically removed. I had been placed out of view, out of thought, out of meaning. And yet I stayed because I had promised myself I would, not for them, for me, because love, even when bruised, doesn't vanish. It remembers, it shows up, it stays in the room, even when the seat it's given is by the kitchen door. And quietly, while everyone else celebrated, I reached into my bag and touched the flash drive, just to remind myself that my story was still in there, and it hadn't been erased. I didn't take it out immediately. Not when the wine was served. Not when the best man toasted with a rehearsed speech. Not even when Sarah's family played their carefully edited childhood montage on the big screen above the dance floor. I simply sat in my chair, the one near the kitchen doors where waiters rushed in and out with trays, my hand resting on my silver clutch, my fingers tracing the hidden zipper. Inside was the flash drive, black, plain, no label. But for me, it carried decades of moments. I had begun assembling it years ago, though I didn't realize at the time what I was building. It started with camcorder tapes I kept in plastic bins, then home-burned DVDs, then finally digital files when I taught myself how to convert old media. I spent hours in the evenings, alone in my small home, transferring memories. It became a ritual, a quiet act of devotion. The footage wasn't perfect. The lighting was often bad, the audio scratchy, but it was real. My son's first steps in the narrow hallway of our old apartment, his squeals of laughter as I chased him in the backyard with a water hose, his voice high-pitched and proud, telling the camera he had learned to write his full name. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper flying through the air. Birthday candles and soccer games and wobbly bike rides. And me, always behind the camera, cheering him on, asking questions, laughing when he laughed. I made the video not for this wedding, but for myself. Yet when I saw the way things were unfolding, when I realized how carefully my existence had been edited out of the celebration, I tucked the flash drive into my purse, not with the plan to make a statement, but to have it close, like a secret I wasn't willing to bury. The wedding montage played halfway through dinner. Sarah's life, as curated by her family, unfolded in front of us. Ballet recitals, family vacations in Italy, pristine school awards, everything crisp and elegant. Each scene looked like it belonged in an advertisement. The music swelled, the images dissolved gently into one another. Guests clapped politely. The room buzzed with warmth and champagne. When the video ended, the DJ took the microphone to announce a short intermission before the next toast. People stood up to stretch. Some made their way to the bar. I stood too, quietly, clutching my bag. No one noticed. I walked toward the back of the room where the tech booth was set up. A young man with a headset was seated in front of a laptop, glancing at a clipboard. He looked up as I approached. I asked him in a low voice if he could play a short video from a flash drive. He hesitated. He glanced at the clipboard again. I held the drive in my hand, not offering more than a calm expression. There was no drama in my request, only quiet intention. He paused, then nodded. I handed him the flash drive. I returned to my table and sat down again, my heart oddly steady. The kitchen door behind me swung open and shut again. Plates clattered, silverware clicked. I adjusted my napkin on my lap and kept my eyes on the screen. Then the screen lit up again. No announcement, no title card, just a shaky home-recorded video. A toddler in footed pajamas toddling down a hallway. He laughed as he ran, looking back at the camera. My voice called to him from behind the lens, warm and clear. "Come on, baby, you've got it." It was Alex, 3 years old, glorious in his messiness, his joy, his vulnerability. The room fell silent. A few heads turned toward the screen. Confusion at first, then curiosity. Another clip played. He was a little older, maybe 6, riding a bicycle without training wheels. The camera jerked as I cheered. His grin filled the frame. He shouted, "Mom, I did it! Did you see me?" There was a soft laugh from somewhere in the room. A hand covered a mouth. Then his second-grade play. Then his first soccer goal. Then a birthday party in our tiny backyard, a SpongeBob cake collapsing in the heat, and his giggle echoing across the lawn. And then a grainy video from what must have been our old living room. He held the camera himself, looking into the lens with that serious face he wore when he had something important to say. "If I ever get married," he whispered, "I want my wife to love me like my mom does." The screen flickered. The next clip was quieter, a simple one. We were sitting on a park bench. He was maybe 15. We weren't talking, just sitting side by side, trees behind us, ducks in the water, sunlight filtering through his hair. Then the screen faded to black. Silence followed, longer than expected. It stretched, thick and still, across the room. Then scattered applause, soft, unsure, then stronger. Then it spread. I heard someone sniffle. A hand tapped the table gently. A fork fell and no one picked it up. I didn't move. I didn't look toward the head table where my son sat. I didn't turn to see Sarah's expression. I simply folded my hands in my lap and stared straight ahead. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't spectacle. This was memory. This was truth. It had lived in my drawer for years. It had waited quietly. Now it had been seen, not curated, not polished, but real. And if I had been seated by the kitchen door, if I had been left out of the program, out of the slideshow, out of the story they chose to tell, then I had just told my own, without speaking, without permission. The flash drive lay now on the tech table, the young man glancing at me from behind his screen, his eyes wide. I offered him the smallest nod. That was enough, because Alex had seen it, and for the first time that evening, I felt like he truly saw me. I remained in my seat long after the applause faded. The clinking of forks resumed. Chairs scraped softly across the floor, and the low hum of conversation returned like a slow tide, washing back over the room. But around me, something had changed. Not in the decor, not in the lighting, but in the air. The stillness left behind by that video hung like smoke, thin, quiet, but impossible to ignore. I didn't look toward the head table immediately. I wasn't ready. My hands stayed folded neatly in my lap, the napkin still across my knees, as though I had never moved. A waiter passed behind me, the kitchen door swinging open, flooding my corner with the sharp scent of rosemary and steam. But I didn't notice. I was too focused on holding still, on not letting my breath tremble, on containing what surged just beneath the surface. I had done what I came to do. I had reminded him. I had reminded them all. The crowd around the room buzzed differently now. People glanced toward me more than they had all evening. Some avoided my eyes, as if embarrassed. Others offered small, hesitant smiles, the kind that come when someone realizes they've misjudged you. A woman across the room, someone from Sarah's side, I assumed, pressed a napkin to her cheek and mouthed something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to collect praise. I was here to reclaim presence. Eventually, I turned my head, slowly, deliberately. My eyes found the head table, and there he was. Alex, my son. His shoulders weren't as straight as they had been earlier. His posture looked softer now, as if the video had peeled something open in him. He was staring at the floor. Sarah leaned in to whisper something, her smile tense. He didn't respond. He sat there, his hands clasped in front of him, watching the linen tablecloth like it held the answer to a question he hadn't known he needed to ask. And then he looked up. Our eyes met. It was not dramatic. No tears, no gasps, no sweeping emotion. But it was real, and it lasted, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Recognition, memory, regret maybe, or just the shock of seeing something that had been buried return intact. He didn't stand, he didn't come to me, but he saw me, truly saw me. And for now, that was enough. I turned back to my plate and took a sip of water. It was lukewarm. The ice had melted. I ate a few bites of roasted vegetables, chewing slowly, grounding myself again in the physical world. Around me, conversations restarted. People returned to their rhythm. But there was a visible shift now, an awareness. I watched as the DJ leaned down to speak with the tech assistant, likely asking about the unscheduled video. There was a brief exchange, and then the DJ returned to the microphone with his usual practiced cheerfulness, thanking guests for their patience and inviting everyone to return to the dance floor. The music swelled. The lights brightened. But nothing could erase what had just played, not even the loudest music. I remained seated. Eventually, a few guests came over. One woman with white hair and a navy dress placed a hand gently on my shoulder as she passed. Another, a man in a gray suit, nodded to me, and said nothing. These gestures, small and silent, felt heavier than the speeches had earlier that night. They weren't sympathy, they were acknowledgement. As the dancing began and laughter rose once more, I reached into my clutch and removed the flash drive. I looked at it in the dim light, turning it between my fingers. Such a small object to hold so much. Then I placed it back into the inner pocket, zipped it shut, and rested my hand atop the bag. I had brought it for myself. I had played it for him. I had done it without permission, and I did not regret it, because somewhere between the scripted perfection and the sterile elegance of the evening, something real had cracked through, something imperfect, something full of history, something with fingerprints and scrapes and late nights and lullabies, something that didn't belong to Sarah's family or the wedding planner or the florist or the guest list. It belonged to me and to him. And now, whether they liked it or not, it belonged to this night. They could pretend I was seated near the kitchen to be out of the way, but now I had reached every corner of that room, not loudly, not with anger, with truth, with memory, with love. And sometimes that's louder than anything a microphone can project. After the video ended, I didn't speak to anyone. I remained in my chair while the room returned to its routine. The music resumed. People laughed again. The flow of wine and chatter continued as if the interruption had never happened. But I knew better. I could see it in the way people glanced at me differently now. Not with pity, not quite with admiration, but with a cautious awareness, like they had witnessed something they hadn't expected and didn't know how to process. I didn't need their reactions. What mattered had already happened. That night, I returned to the hotel alone. I didn't join the others for drinks at the bar, didn't linger to say goodbye. I made my way back to the quiet of my room and sat on the edge of the bed, still in my dress, shoes off, clutch beside me. I unzipped it slowly and took out the flash drive. It was still warm from my hand. I held it in my palm, staring at it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. It wasn't the object that meant something. It was the memory it held, the memories I had protected. They had tried to erase me. Not maliciously, maybe just conveniently. But what they didn't understand was that the history they ignored had never belonged to them. It belonged to me, and I had carried it, carefully, quietly, through years of being sidelined, through holidays where my seat was an afterthought, through birthday cards with no return calls. And I had never let it break. The next morning, I woke early and packed in silence. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the room was still bathed in a kind of pale gray that made everything seem suspended in time. I checked out without speaking more than a few words to the front desk. The road home was long, but I didn't turn on the radio. I let the quiet fill the car. I watched the trees blur past the window, gold and rust-colored leaves catching the wind. Back in my own house, the world felt still, not empty, just restored. I made tea, the same kind Alex used to ask for when he had a sore throat as a boy. I sat at the kitchen table, the flash drive resting beside my mug, the same table where he once did his homework, where I helped him glue school projects, where I bandaged his scrapes and listened to his fears. I let my fingers drift across the wood, worn smooth over time, and thought of how many hours I had spent at that table, waiting for someone to come home, to need me, to simply see me. But something had shifted. I didn't feel like I was waiting anymore. Later that afternoon, I opened the hallway closet. Inside were the albums I hadn't looked at in years. I pulled them out one by one, setting them on the coffee table, and began to flip through them. Page after page of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings, first days of school. His gap-toothed grin, his scraped knees, the way his arms always reached for me in every photo when he was small. It hurt, but it didn't hollow me. These memories weren't dependent on anyone else's recognition. They lived inside me. I didn't need them to be reposted or acknowledged in speeches. I had lived them. I had earned them. As I turned the pages, I realized something else. I hadn't done any of this for applause. Not the raising, not the care, not the long nights or hard years. I had done it because I loved him, because I wanted him to grow into someone who knew what love felt like, even if he forgot for a while. Even if others tried to write a new version of his past that suited their narrative better. That's what the flash drive was really about. Not revenge, not correction. It was about making space for truth, because memory matters, even if it's inconvenient, even if it makes people uncomfortable, even if it reveals what others would rather leave out. By the end of the evening, I placed the albums back on the shelf, but I left the flash drive on the coffee table in plain view, not to display it, but to remind myself I had not been erased, and that was what mattered most, because I remembered, and now so did he. The days that followed passed in a strange, weightless rhythm. The wedding was over. The guests had gone home. The flowers had wilted, and yet something lingered in me. Not regret, not anger, but a rawness I couldn't quite name. I moved through my house slowly, as though I were relearning how to exist within it. Each room felt familiar, but slightly shifted, like an old photograph slightly out of focus. I didn't hear from Alex. Not that day, not the next. The silence wasn't surprising, but it was sharp. I told myself I hadn't expected a call, but a part of me still looked at my phone every morning, every evening, watching for a number that didn't appear. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want performance. What I wanted, more than anything, was acknowledgement. I wanted him to sit with what he had seen and let it move through him. Instead, I sat with it myself. I returned to my routines, but everything felt slower. I made breakfast, swept the porch, fed the birds. I took long walks in the late afternoon, letting the chill settle into my skin. I passed neighbors who waved politely, unaware that I was carrying something quiet and heavy inside me. A memory no longer secret. A story no longer hidden. Sometimes I sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window with the flash drive resting next to my hand. I didn't play it again. I didn't need to. I knew every frame, every breath, every moment. What mattered wasn't the video anymore. It was what it had done, what it had undone. On the fourth day, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, not long, not dramatic. It was from Alex. He said he didn't know what to say, that the video had broken something open in him, that he had forgotten parts of himself, that somewhere along the way, the story of who he was had been rewritten, and he had let it happen, that what he saw on the screen wasn't just memory, it was truth. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to explain away the choices made. He simply said, "Thank you." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it, carefully, and placed it in the drawer with the other small things I had kept over the years. The turkey made of construction paper, the crayon drawings, the birthday cards, the letters from camp, and now this, his first adult admission that memory had power. The next day, he came by, alone, no formal announcement, no flowers or gifts, just a knock at the door and the weight of time between us. I opened it. He stood there, older and more fragile than I had remembered, holding nothing but his own silence. I let him in. We didn't talk much. I made tea. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the album open between us. He pointed to a picture of himself as a boy, standing in a Halloween costume I had sewn by hand. A ghost, with eye holes cut too wide and shoes that didn't match. He smiled. Then he looked at me. It was small, but it was enough. He stayed for an hour. Then he left. But when the door closed behind him, I didn't feel dismissed. I felt seen. Later, I went to the table and moved the flash drive to a small box. I didn't need it out anymore. Its work was done. Not everything had been said, but something had begun, and for the first time in years, that beginning felt real. This wasn't closure. This wasn't a clean ending, but it was after. And after, I learned, is where you begin to breathe again. Winter came early that year. The trees outside my window stood bare and still, their silence mirroring the quiet I had settled into. The wedding was months behind me now, and yet it lingered like the scent of something long extinguished. Not unpleasant, just undeniable. Life hadn't returned to what it was before, but something new had started to take shape. Something I hadn't planned for, but welcomed all the same. Alex called now, not every day, not with fanfare, but consistently. Sometimes just to check in, sometimes with nothing to say, and sometimes with something heavy in his voice, like the pause before an apology that still didn't have the right words. I didn't press. I let him come to me on his own terms, the way a child might return to a place they once felt safe. He visited occasionally, usually alone. The first few times were quiet and tentative. We would drink tea in the kitchen and talk about neutral things, weather, work, the garden I'd covered for the season. But beneath our conversations was a current we both could feel, a new kind of honesty, a beginning not built on obligation, but on something earned. He never brought up the wedding. Neither did I. But he always lingered near the photo albums now. He'd open one, look through a few pages, then leave it half closed on the table like a bookmark in a story he was finally ready to read. Sarah never came with him. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. Then, one Sunday, he asked me if I wanted to come over for dinner. His voice was careful, unsure. He said Sarah wouldn't be there that evening. I said yes. I didn't hesitate. I brought a pie, not to impress anyone, not to perform, just to bring something of my own. When I arrived, the house was neat and too quiet, the kind of quiet that says something has shifted, even if no one names it. He set the table for two. We ate simply, talked about nothing important, but when I stood to leave, he walked me to the door and told me something had changed in him since the video. He said it softly, without looking at me, but I heard it, and I believed it. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was mine, entirely mine. I had not fought for a seat at someone else's table. I had built one of my own. In the days that followed, I noticed something else. The calls continued. The visits became warmer. My place in his life was no longer tied to a title or event or polite obligation. It was a choice, his, mine, both. I didn't erase what had happened. I didn't pretend it hadn't hurt, but I didn't carry it like a wound anymore. I carried it like a lesson, a reminder that being forgotten doesn't make you invisible, that love isn't measured by proximity or performance, that history, once remembered, can rewrite the future, not erase the past. I left the flash drive in the drawer, buried beneath layers of memory, not hidden, just resting. It had done what I needed it to do. And now, the choice to move forward belonged to me. No one else. Not a bride with perfect posture. Not a seating chart designed by someone who didn't know me. Not a son who once forgot where he came from. It was my choice to remain exactly as I was, present, rooted, unapologetic, and I chose to stay.